Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 164, Al Rosen. Now, if you're like me, you may have heard the name Al Rosen before. Maybe you know he was a great baseball player for the Cleveland Indians in the 1950s. Maybe you've seen his name pop up in discussions when it comes to the MVP or players who just missed the Triple Crown. But chances are you don't fully know just how dominant he was or how interesting his story really is. Rosen had a relatively short career, but at his peak, he was one of the most feared hitters in baseball. In 1953, he hit .336 with 43 home runs and batted in 145, and he won the American League MVP. He finished just 1/100th of a point behind Mickey Vernon for the batting title, narrowly missing what would have been a Triple Crown season. But Rosen's story isn't just about numbers. He played in an era where his Jewish identity made him a target, and he never backed down. He was tough, outspoken, and carried himself with a confidence that didn't always sit well with everyone. After his playing days, Rosen stayed in the game and became a highly respected executive, helping build successful teams in multiple organizations. On today's episode of Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to take a deeper look at Al Rosen's life, both on the field and off, his legacy. And we're going to do it all with my guest, Joseph Wancho, who wrote a terrific biography on Rosen called Hebrew Hammer, a biography of Al Rosen, all-star third baseman. Now, before we get there, just a couple of reminders. Please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at Sports F Heroes. Look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook, and wherever it is you are listening or watching, please hit that subscribe button and give Sports Forgotten Heroes a follow and a like. And if you want to reach out, please send me an email to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. And hey, one other note. My first book, College All-Stars versus NFL Champions, the Chicago Charity Football Games from 1934 to 1976, is now available on Amazon. This book takes a look back at the fantastic series that launched the exhibition football season every year from 1934 through 1976, when a team of college all-stars played the defending NFL champion. Please check it out. You can order it on Amazon or get it from McFarland Publishing. Or you can even send me an email to sportsfh.info@gmail.com for more information. Again, that's sportsfh.info@gmail.com for more information on how to get my book, College All-Stars versus NFL Champions. And as always, I thank you for your support. Okay, let's get into today's show with my guest, Joseph Wancho. Joe, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. I am thrilled you were able to join.
Thank you, Warren.
Hey, man, great topic. Love the topic. Al Rosen, you wrote a terrific book, The Hebrew Hammer, biography, Al Rosen, all-star third baseman. And I'd actually like to start off the podcast with this question. Before you began your research, what did you think you knew about Al Rosen, and what surprised you most once you dug in?
So I knew about his playing career a little bit. just because I knew he was on those really good Indians teams from the 1950s, and I knew he was a home run hitter and so forth. I didn't realize about. I mean, I guess I didn't really think about the anti-Semitism that he faced in the minor and major leagues. Well, his whole life, actually. And so, no matter how much you are prepared for something like that, it still kind of smacks you in the face a little bit when you read about things like that. And I knew nothing about his front office career. I knew next to nothing. I didn't. I guess I might have known he was with the Yankees, but and the Giants, but I don't think I knew about the Astros. So, to me, that was the most interesting part, was researching his general manager, because that's far more interesting than a player, because he's making decisions. You're making trades. You're involved with the whole organization. So to me, that was the most interesting part to research.
I think on today's show, we'll probably concentrate more about his playing days. Do you think, when it comes to baseball history, that Al Rosen is somewhat overlooked? And if so, why?
Well, I think he's overlooked in Cleveland for sure, because I think if you stopped anybody on the street and asked them who was the last Cleveland ball player to be named MVP, they wouldn't be able to tell you. And it was 1953, of course. Was that 73 years? So, so that's a long time. And as great as a person and player as Jose Ramirez is, he's never going to win the MVP in the American League as long as you got Judge hitting 60 home runs a year and stuff. So I think Al Rosen is it, and he'll be it for the foreseeable future. And I think that's one of the reasons, when I talked to Gary Mitchum over at Mark McFarland before we started this, that's the player we settled on, because not much was known about him. Actually, I didn't realize his career was so short. It was cut down by injuries, so I didn't. He only played like 6 years, so so that was interesting. I did get to talk to his son, so I learned some things there. But I feel that he is overlooked by a lot of people. I'm sure most people wouldn't be able to tell you who Al Rosen was today.
Mm-hmm. I hate to say this, but we live in, especially today, such a politically charged world. So let's hit the big one right off the bat. When he played, anti-Semitism was a big part of the game, as was, racism as a whole. Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby breaking into ball, back in those days as well. Talk about some of the things that happened to Al Rosen and the kind of anti-Semitism he faced.
Well, I know when he was in high school, he went out for the football team, and the head coach said, Rosen, what are you doing coming out for the football team? Jews like to play tennis and golf. They don't like to play contact sports. And, that of course, offended him greatly. He said in the minor leagues, he received the most harassment in the minor leagues from the opposing teams, fans, umpires. But at the same time, since he was the best player on most of the teams that he was with, his name was always in the local papers. So a lot of Jewish families would have him over for brunch on Sundays or for dinner and so forth. So he said his minor league career, personally wise, it was the biggest uplifting for him that he was accepted by so many families, where he played, but also, he had to endure a lot as being a Jewish ball player.
And he grew up somewhat in the deep South, right? He was in Florida and then later North Carolina.
was born in Spartansburg, but he had trouble breathing, and he the doctor suggested they move to Florida, and his parents divorced, and him and his younger brother Jerry and his mom lived with his aunt and uncle. And when they were looking for housing, there were signs, on housing: no dogs, no Jews. And he lived. Now I'm not familiar with Florida or the Miami area, but in an area near Little Cuba, and he said that him and that's where he was an accomplished fighter, and that's where he learned to fight. Because him
He
and his
was a
brother
boxer.
were always.
He was a boxer, right? He got a scholarship of some sort.
Well, he boxed in a military school. People confuse it. They'll say he was a Golden Glove winner, but that's not necessarily true. And he said he did all right. He said I took my lumps, and stuff like that too. But he he didn't back down from a fight, of course, and he had a he would get set off when people brought up the hatred, and rightly so. So he was tested a lot, I would say.
It's a hard comparison to make, but how would you compare the anti-Semitism he faced compared to the racism that Jackie Robinson faced? Because while it wasn't at exactly the same time, it was in the same time period.
Well, I think Jackie Robinson, you didn't have to know his antisemitism; you could just see it. So I think that would, that right there, that's a, that, you could look at Rosen and you wouldn't know, you wouldn't know, I guess, but Jackie Robinson, you would identify right away, and Hank Greenberg went through the same thing. And of course, he was general manager when Rosen was in Cleveland, and he went through the same hurdles that Rosen did just a couple decades earlier. So whether they talked about that, I'm not sure, but he had someone to talk about it, I guess, if he wanted to, because, like I said, Greenberg went through the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Al Rosen, you brought up, he had asthma as a child. They had to move south. He was a fighter, a boxer. Father left the family. How did his upbringing shape both his toughness and his identity as a player?
Well, he was. I think that he never played college ball or anything. He never played ball except in the park. They didn't have organized teams, and so they had softball, which is where he got his name, Flip, for the way he pitched softball. And I think when you are faced with that kind of hatred, you are going to be a fighter. You are going to take on people when no matter what the situation is. And I think that's what grew him to be a really good ball player. When he came up, he wasn't that great of a fielder or hitter, but he made himself into one just by practice and perseverance. And and I think that's that fighting mentality. You tell me I can't do it, but I'm going to. And I think that's what he drew on.
Where did he learn to play the game? How did he learn to play the game?
Well, they had pickup games in the Miami area at different playgrounds and so forth. And when he went to Florida and Miami, and actually he played football, I think it was, for Miami one year. But he was dating a girl who was a clubhouse pro and a friend of Roger Peckinpah, who was the manager of the Indians in 1941 or 42, I think, or before Boudreaux. I'm not before Boudreaux, I think. And they recommended he recommended the golf pros a friend of Peckinpah's, and he recommended Rosen. He had seen him play on the Sandlots, and that's where that connection was made. And of course, he went to 1 year minor leagues, and then he served 3 years with the Navy. So he, it was put on hold almost right away.
Yeah, so he went to college, University of Florida, left to play minor league baseball, and the war broke out. He served in the Navy before getting back to minor league baseball. He wasn't really challenged in the minors. He was just a really solid, good ball player.
Well, he was a really good athlete. But again, he could hit. He could always hit. Now his defense at third base was, he played. I think the ball hit his face more than his glove. He had several broken noses. His son told me, from playing third base, and there were and he was a gamer. He did not want to be taken out of games and stuff, but stitch me up and put me in. He didn't want to miss games, but he was, again, a fighter. But when he was in Kansas City, they had a shared minor league team with the Yankees, and some of the players said that his fielding was greatly improved from where he got to the major leagues from when he was in the minors. Now, that doesn't mean it was great, but it was just improved. So I don't really know, what that was.
Right. Well, in the minors, I mean, his first full season really in the minors came after the war, anyway.
Right.
Was with Pittsfield in the Can-Am League, and I mean, let's see, 15 home runs, 86 ribbies. He had 323 in 107 games. And then with Oklahoma City in the Texas League, AA ball, really, he hit 349, 25 homers, 141 RBI. I mean, again,
and he had some really spectacular games in series too, in there. And like I says, he had power. He could always hit. But they had Ken Keltner was holding down third base, and who was a terrific fielder. So when Rosen did get his call ups, he wasn't hitting very well. He didn't get much opportunity, but he wasn't hitting well. So back to the minors he went, and like you said, he did really well.
Yeah, I mean, and he got his first call up was in 1947. He appeared in 7 games and didn't do all that well. He had 1 hit in 9 at bats. Then he went back down to Kansas City, as you mentioned, and in 48, I mean, he had a heck of a season with KC. 326, 25 homers, 110 ribbies, and Cleveland did call him up, and they thought enough of him to keep him on the roster for the World Series. And he actually appeared in a game in the World Series in 48.
Well, the reason they kept him was because the one pitcher had he collapsed at home plate, and they actually added him to the roster after the deadline, but the Braves had to allow it. They had agreed to it. And he said that he was a bat, so they brought him along, and he did pitch hit for Satchel Paige. Don Black was the pitcher. He collapsed at home plate late in the game, and that's when they put Rosen on the team. And funny about that, 1947. That was the last time he saw his father outside Yankee Stadium. His father had heard about his career, went to go see him, and whatever happened, and that's the last time he saw him.
Well, again, so 47, 48, 49 sort of gets another cup of coffee with Cleveland. He appears in 23 games. Talk about that.
Well, 49, he actually broke camp with the Indians. And what happened was Keltner got hurt, and they sent him down to San Diego. Keltner got hurt, but they didn't recall Rosen. Bob Kennedy played third, and so did Boudreaux, Ray Boone, maybe a couple games. So they didn't call up Rosen. They just kept him in San Diego. They didn't even bring him back up. So in 49, he broke camp with the Tribe, but then he got sent down and never got back.
Well, and then came the big year in 1950. He makes his way and becomes a regular with the team. And I mean, my gosh, what a rookie year. He had 287, set the American League record for most home runs by a rookie with 37, knocks in 116, finishes, I think, in the top 20 for MVP voting. But the rookie of the year, he picked the wrong year.
It was Walt Dropo.
Yeah, Walt Dropo wins rookie of the year, and Whitey Ford, I think, finished second, and he was. Let's see, he it was a heck of a season for rookies. Third place went to Chico Carrasquel. I can't even say can't even say his name. I mean, tough competition.
Well, not only that, they ended up, they cut Keltner and so they gave the third base job to Rosen, and the home opener against Detroit, folks were cheering. They wanted Keltner. They were chanting for Keltner. Rosen hits a late inning home run. They lose the game, but he hits a home run. And then, people kind of, that's the thing. What do you do for me lately? And he hit a home run. So then people, accepted him, I suppose. And like you said, he had a great rookie year. And his record stood, I think, until Troy Glaus broke it, I think, when he was with the Angels for most home runs by a rookie. I'm pretty sure.
Well, I mean, he had a great rookie season. Was there any games in particular that stood out or when was it that the Cleveland fans finally embraced him and accepted him as the new third baseman, and bad term, but forgot about Keltner? Yep, we like Rosen now.
Well, I don't know. I couldn't pinpoint a specific time when it happened, but I do know that, like I said, in that opener, after he hit the home run, people were starting to see they saw what he could do. And, he hit the home run in the opener, then he hit another one until the middle of May. And his average was, it wasn't that great, but eventually as the season got along, he picked it up. And by the end of May, he was hitting close to 300. So, I think it was just, he hits the opening day home run. It quiets the folks down, and then they just waited and see what he could do, and he came along. He never really had. I think he had one game in his career he had 3 home runs, but he never really had dominant stats. I know there was a game in June he had 4 RBIs, I believe, but back then too, the Indians were fighting for pennants every year with the Yankees. So you needed you needed his muscle in the lineup.
What kind did he face a lot of anti-Semitism in the majors, or was that really a minor league thing? And
no, he did. Maybe not as much. And Al Rosen felt that when Israel became a nation in 1946 or 46, it showed that the Jewish folks would stick up and fight for themselves. And he always felt after that happened, he heard less anti-Semitism. So I've read that in a couple books. That was his reasoning, but still, you got people out there who are going to make comments to you. I know one time in Comiskey Park, the end of an inning, instead of running to first base dugout where the Tribe was, he walked over to third base dugout and challenged anybody who was making comments to him. I know Matt Batts, the catcher from Boston, had made comments to him, and but a lot of that too was his rivals had a lot of respect for him, and they kind of, in Matt Batts' case, that I know the Bobby Dorr pulled him aside and said, "Hey, we don't do that here, and he's a good player, so just get off him." So I know that sometimes players would intervene.
You mentioned Hank Greenberg before and the fact that he was the GM. Rosen, I think, took Greenberg's nickname, the Hebrew Hammer. It's
Well,
an
there's a lot of nicknames that
yeah.
you know, I guess that nickname was mostly attributed to Greenberg. But I think most people called Rosen Flip, like I said before, from the way he played softball. I just use Hebrew Hammer for the book. I guess he probably could have carried that nickname, but it was really just I looked and I didn't see it as a title for another book, so I kind of stole it and use it for his.
Well, how did he feel about that nickname? There was a
The
couple.
Hebrew Hammer.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that I ever saw him. I don't. I don't know that I ever saw him say anything about it one way or the other. That's a number. Like I said, that mostly belonged to Greenberg. I stole it for his book. He's been passed away from him. I don't know that he even really. He if you read papers in Cleveland, his teammates called him Flip. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Staying on this topic a little bit longer, did he embrace being seen as a representative figure for Jewish athletes, or was
gosh,
that
yes.
something place I
Yeah.
talked about?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yes. He embraced it wholeheartedly, and his upbringing, single parent. I know he had written that he didn't have a bar mitzvah or anything, and neither his brother. But as far as I know, he was devout, and he followed his religion. When he lived in Cleveland, he lived in Shaker Heights, which is back then, probably still now today, is a very strong Jewish city. A lot of Jewish folks live there, and that's I'm sure that's where he felt comfortable, and he did embrace it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Back to the field. I mean, we were talking just before. Powerful hitter. In 1951, he had 265 with 24 homers and knocked in 102. And then he really started to roll. In 52, he had 302, 28 homers and 105 ribbies. 1953, one of, I guess you got to consider it one of the greatest seasons ever, period. He had 43 home runs, knocked in 145. Both of those numbers led the American League. He also led the American League in slugging with 613 slugging percentage, OPS of 1.034. He led with 367 total bases. His WAR, again, led 10.1, and he led with 115 runs scored. His batting average was 336. The winning batting average was 337. He was 1 point away from winning the Triple Crown. Mickey Vernon of the Washington Senators hit 337. And both of them really went after it. I mean, I looked it up. Vernon went 2 for 4 the last day of the season. Rosen went 3 for 5. I mean, what a close race. What can you tell us about it? And how great was that season for Al Rosen?
Well, I think too, Mickey Vernon had a pretty big lead on him, and Rosen kind of came from behind. And I know the last series. Well, they claim the Senators played some shenanigans in that last game um, to ensure that Mickey Vernon didn't come to the plate. But who really knows? But I think that Al Rosen, if you look, in July, he hit 309 and 354 in August and 392 in September. So he was just, as the season went on, he was just catching fire. And that's what, they did an interview with Mickey Vernon in Baseball Digest, and he said, Al was coming up fast. And I don't think anybody thought he was going to catch him, but, he had 17 home runs and 60 RBIs in the last 2 months of the year. That's incredible, and he was just, he was on fire. He got hot. And I think, that last game, they piped in the Senators and Athletics game into the press box at Cleveland so they could keep an eye on what he was what was going on there. And Rosen says, as it turns out, he had one at bat. He was, they were figuring out the percentage points, but even if he would have got a hit, he still would have fallen short. But he hit a ground ball and he to the infield, and he lunged for first base. He tried to jump to get it and he's Lopez came out to argue, but he said he was out. And he took it with he said that's just the way it is. I don't think he was really bitter about it or anything. He just he just fell short.
And that was my next question. How much did it mean to him that he missed the Triple Crown by, I get my math mixed up, 1/100th of a point or something like that? And
yeah, but you know what? What though, Warren, that might be true. But I think what was more important was he was the first unanimous choice for an MVP award. And so I think he would take that over. The Triple Crown he would have got, but he was still the unanimous choice for MVP. So I think he, I think he was pretty happy. In fact, he and his wife broke down and cried. He was very moved by it. He was very happy about that. Very moved.
Yeah, I just thought of this question. All this is going on. He is one of baseball's great offensive players. Wins the MVP award, and the years after, he was just this hitting machine. How did the Jewish community embrace him at that point? You talked about people would have him over for a meal when he was in the minor leagues. How did the Jewish community embrace him?
His wife was from Alabama. His second wife, it was a second wife. She was from Alabama, and he met her in college, and they had corresponded and so forth. And she came up to Cleveland, and her dad came as a chaperone, which today you would never hear of. And the papers all carried stories of their engagement party and what the food was served and what people were wearing and things. But she went to go see him play. She'd never been to Cleveland before, of course, and she went to go see a game at Cleveland Stadium. And she left in tears in the sixth inning because people were screaming anti-Semitic names at Al Rosen, who's now, he's just not a player. He's my fiance. He's someone I love. And she left crying. I think the word she used was vitriolic, and she said that the hatred was just, she couldn't believe it. And here, this was 1952. He was already an established star, as we said, and people still, now, as far as how the Jewish community treated him, I couldn't say.
Mm-hmm. What made him such a dominant hitter in that era? Was it mechanics, mindset, something else? What was it?
I think his whole career was just because he was so determined to do good, and I think this is a guy who's not only is he a class individual, but he was a real professional, and um, he practiced his craft, and he, there are stories about him in spring training and taking extra batting practice and taking extra fielding practice till his hands were just callous. This guy, he practiced his craft. He always knew to improve, and until injury started getting him, he was at top of his game as far as a hitter. But he put the work in, and his power, I mean, his biceps, they were like Popeye. They were huge, and a lot of that is probably from training as a fighter and so forth. But he was compact. I think he was only 5'11" or 5'10" or something, but he was compact. And he could, he could hit the ball a long way.
If you had to, sometimes I ask this question, to in today's game.
Oh boy, I'm bad at that. Well, I'm sure you could do similarities to Jose Ramirez, who also has good power and good hitting and hits around 300. Jose has more speed, I would say probably, but I think you compare generations like that. I think it's just, I mean, it's 70 years ago, like we said. That's kind of hard to do.
Your book touches a little bit about he had a strong personality. How did that shape his relationship with his teammates and management, his personality?
Well, I think he was a leader. He was a voice in the clubhouse, but he also led by example. And I think that he and Al Lopez were really close. And Lopez asked him to change positions, asked him to do this and that, and he did it. Because that's what a leader does. A leader will make those changes for the good of the team. And I think probably more so by examples like that is how people respected him and gave credence to when he had something to say. When he got there as a full-time, Dobie was already there, Satchel Paige was already there, so he didn't have to lead on Al Smith, so people were already there. He didn't have to lead on that accord, but I think that by example, people respected him. They respected the way he went about his game, and that's what gave him the strong voice.
Mm-hmm. He was pretty intense too. Do you think his intensity combined with that personality?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was. He was intense, and he had a short fuse too. And I think in some respects, the short fuse came out when he felt he was being wrong, like anybody would. But he had maybe a short fuse. Maybe that's selling him short because he was a very good competitor, and he gave it his all. I mean, that's what he did. Even when he played hurt, he always want to be out there.
Yeah, he only played 7 full seasons, and then he retired. He was just 32. Were the injuries just that bad? Why did he retire at such a young age?
Well, it started in 1954, and he was hitting 382, I think it was. And Lopez asked him to play first base because they didn't have a first baseman in 1954. Luke Easter had gotten hurt. They didn't have a first baseman, and they put Rudy Regalado in at third base, and they moved Rosen over across the diamond. And Rosen said, "Lopez asked me to walk across the water. I'm going to do it." And in Chicago, he was playing first base off the bag, and the ground ball came to him, and it hit his right middle finger. And that hampered him the whole year. He ended up hitting 300, but he was hitting 382. His averages dropped the whole year. He couldn't grip a bat, and he couldn't grip a ball to throw it. And even though he did hit two home runs in the All-Star game that year, but he that was the beginning of the end of it, because and then he had, and people don't know this, in the World Series he sat out game 3 because he had shoulder injuries. He was just beat up, and that, and then after that he had injuries every year. He just started going downhill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think, I'm asking you, Joe, your personal opinion, do you think he left the game too soon, or was it inevitable because the injuries took such a toll on him that
No, because I think 55 and 56 he had not out Rosen like years. And he had just gotten over 1,000 hits in 1956, and he said, there was a big there was coverage of it in the paper. Was Al Rosen staying or was he leaving? And Greenberg didn't really want him to stay, I don't think. And there was one of the writers, his name's Gordon Cobbledick, and he's in the I think he's in the writers wing at the Hall of Fame, and he said he wrote an editorial, Al, the team doesn't want you on this team, anymore. And I think he was smart enough. He used to work as a stockbroker in the off season, and he was smart enough to make a career for himself because that's what he went into, finance. And he, I don't think, I think he had second thoughts in 57, but they said, no, just, I don't know how the conversation went after it was a conversation, but he ended up not coming back. But I think he was in the last year. There was a game against Washington at the stadium, in Cleveland Stadium, and he got into a Pete Reiser was sliding in third, and he knocked Rosen down. It wasn't unintentional, but he wrenched his knee, and people were cheering that he got hurt and saying some not so good name. Now, I looked up that game, and there's only 7,800 people at it, but Al Lopez went off on it, talking about the Cleveland fans and how bush they were and stuff. It was a pretty big thing, and he came back, but he was just, whether that bothered, he said it didn't bother him, but it would have had to. And he just, his production went down, and I think he, let's face it, he lost 3 years because of the service. So I think he just probably thought it was time. And I don't think you can, under those circumstances, fault anybody for wanting to give it up and not risking further injury than what he was already going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he certainly put up the numbers when he was healthy, that's for sure. Overall, for his career, he had 192 homers. That's like, he averaged like 30 home runs a year, and he hit 285 for his career, and that's with his final 3 seasons really being a drop-off with 24, 21, and 15 home runs, 102 ribbies, 81, and 61. You mentioned it. He left the game as a stockbroker. He spent 17 years out of the game and then came back in 1973 with the Yankees as their president and CEO. How does that happen? How do you leave the game for such a long period of time and come back as the president and CEO of a team you were never with?
Well, it was actually 1978.
78, yeah, 78, yeah.
Well, he was a stockbroker for, and don't forget too, he was part of an ownership team that tried to buy the Indians with George Steinbrenner in 1970, and he was part of he was part of some social organizations too. One called the Wahoo Club. Al Rosen started that, which was a support group for the Indians as far as getting fan involvement, taking road trips and things like that. He was integral into that. But, he was a stockbroker for, maybe after he retired, close to 20 years. Then, he gave that up. He moved out to Vegas. He worked for one of the casinos, but it was being a casino greeter. It wasn't something he really, I guess maybe it wasn't what he envisioned, what he was going to do. I don't know. and Steinbrenner went out there for a prize fight, and they were really good friends, and he asked Rosen. He said, well, he was Rosen's guest. He was Steinbrenner's guest during the 1977 All-Star game. It was at Yankee Stadium, and at that time he asked Rosen to come back, and Rosen said, no. And then he went out there, during the offseason. He said, look, Cedric Tallis will be running things, but I want you to, he'll be the president, but I want you to be the, the GM. And, he did. And, of course, he hired Bob Lemon to replace Billy Martin, and that whole miss, and they won the world championship. But, he was, he was really fortunate to fall into a situation like that, because him and Steinbrenner were buddies, even though they did clash. But he fell into a good. That was a solid club, right? They won in '77, they won in '78, they went to the series in '76 at 3 pennant, winning seasons in a row. So he was fortunate that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, he came in during a good time, and then he spent time with the Astros, and he spent time with the San Francisco Giants. I'm not sure many people realize how impactful he was as an executive.
Well, I will tell you that from what I've read about him is that he left the Yankees in '79, and he got hired by the Astros. The Astros had just won, I think, a division title in 1980, and they lost to the Phillies in the championship. They hired Rosen after the season. They fired Tal Smith. And Tal Smith, who also worked for the Yankees, built that team out of nothing, the Astros. And he was a very smart baseball man, and he put that team on, well, he was in a no-win situation, because if he won with the Astros, well, he was doing it with Tal Smith's ball players. If he failed, well, then he tore it up. He tore up what Tal Smith built. And then in 1981, his first season, the strike hit. So they made the playoffs. They won one half. They lost to the Dodgers in the first round. And they never made the playoffs again. And I call them the Houston mediocres in the book, because that's what they were. They were very mediocre, and they never did make a mark. And it really wasn't until the Giants, when he was working for Bob Lurie, even Steinbrenner. So Steinbrenner and Houston, he was always under the microscope. He had to get all deals cleared and everything. But it wasn't until he got to San Francisco, he was comfortable working with Roger Craig as his manager, that he really, I think that was his golden time. Even though he didn't win just one pennant, but not a world championship, I think that was his really golden time as a front office man. He spent 7 years there, and I think everybody liked him. I think the only run-in he had was with Kevin Mitchell, and I think that a lot of people had run-ins with Kevin Mitchell. He switched a lot of teams, and but I think the Yankees was hard for him. He hired Lemon to replace Billy Martin, and then they announced Billy Martin was coming back, and it was just a whole big mess, and Reggie Jackson said, this guy Rosen, he was a heck of a player. He's not going to take crap from Steinbrenner, and he didn't. He resigned because it wasn't like everybody else before him or since. It was just a toxic situation. And then he went to another one in Houston, and like I said, he replaced Tal Smith, but it wasn't until he got to San Francisco, I think, those were his best years.
And when he got there and was really able to put his finger on the pulse of the team and do the job that he was hired to do without somebody always looking over his shoulder, was he at all ahead of his time in how he approached the business of baseball?
Well, maybe because he was very honest. And he, I think there was a writer for San Francisco Chronicle, maybe it was Examiner. His name was Ray Ratto, and he said, "I'm going to miss Al Rosen because I enjoyed talking to him about." He says he could never give me all the information I wanted, but he never lied to me, and I enjoyed talking. And that was a I think it's the last sentence in this San Francisco, because there was a story that the Giants were going to move to St. Petersburg, and then at the last minute they were, and I remember that happening, and I remember, they got saved, and he said, "But I'm going to remember, Mrs. Stories and his honesty." He says he never lied to me. Sometimes he couldn't tell me everything, but he never lied to me, and I think that's a fitting tribute to how he went about his business.
Mm-hmm. When you step back, what do you think Al Rosen's true legacy is, not just as a player, but as a person?
Well, I think he was he was a top shelf person, and I think that obviously you're a GM, you're gonna have enemies. You're not gonna please everybody, but as a player and as a man, I think he was well respected. I think he, there was a story and he came back to Cleveland. And this is where the Indians or the Guardians fall down. They don't celebrate their history like a lot of other teams do. And I think it was in 2013. No, it might have been 2003. They brought him back to celebrate his MVP year. And on Sundays they have a promotion. Kids run the bases after the game, and now they switch it to adults walk around the bases. They don't want adults run around the bases because they might kill themselves. But Al Rosen, he stood at home plate, shook everybody's hand that came across. I mean, the guy is just, and there's a lot of articles written about him. The guy was just he was a class individual, and I think that there are things that people could look at and say, what about this or that? But you could do that with anybody. But I think as far as the way people viewed him in the baseball world, he was very well respected as a front office exec and as a player.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Hebrew Hammer, a biography of Al Rosen, all-star third baseman. Came out a couple of years ago, and if you haven't done so, read it. Really great book. Again, thanks for being here. I enjoyed our conversation, and it was fun.
All right, thanks, Warren. I appreciate it.
Al Rosen's career may not have lasted as long as some of the other great players from his era, but at his peak, he was one of the very best in the game. A four-time All-Star and the American League MVP in 1953, he hit .285 for his career, whacked 192 home runs, and knocked in 717. He was a key part of some outstanding Cleveland Indians teams, and later he went on to make a significant impact as an executive in baseball. But beyond the numbers, Rosen's story is one of toughness, identity, and a player who never backed down, both on the field and off. Thanks again to my guest today, Joseph Wanchel, and thanks to all of you for tuning in. And I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.